Callable US Treasuries, and a new T-bill. Last week's drop in bond yields, plus the upcoming week's auctions and yield expectations for some of those auctions. Hello, member super savers and bond course fans. I hope you're having a good week. The Treasury market definitely had an exciting week by its standards. So these are the 3 topics that we'll be covering in today's update video. As usual, here's our front of video disclaimer. For a detailed disclaimer, please refer to the end of this video. Let's dive in now, folks. Last week, the Treasury released its second quarterly refunding statement for 2024. The quarterly refunding statement basically walks investors through the Treasury short-term plans for note and bond issuance. Not a nail-biting topic most of the time, but hey, times are not normal and the government still needs to issue lots of treasuries to fund its ever-growing debt pile. And so the markets were watching with some trepidation. Now, the Treasury had some good news and some bad news on that front. On the positive note, the Treasury does not expect to increase auction sizes in the next few months. The bad news is that this means auction sizes will also not go down, but rather continue to stay at their current record levels. There were 3 additional takeaways from the recent quarterly refunding announcement. Takeaway 1. We will be seeing a 6-week T-bill in the not-so-distant future, as the Treasury intends to change the regular 6-week CMB into a benchmark bill, which will become a part of the regularly scheduled bill issuance schedule going forward. Investor reception to the 6-week CMB has been strong, and elevation to a benchmark status will further support demand, which can only help with raising ever more money. Remember that CMBs work like T-bills in terms of interest and principal repayment. This table here outlines the 3 primary differences between CMBs and T-bills. Bond beginners, please refer back to Module 4, Video H for a refresher on CMBs versus T-bills. The Treasury estimates that it will need a few quarters to fully implement this change, and we will post updates on this as soon as we have more details. Takeaway 2. On top of the new 6-week T-bill, the Treasury keeps looking for even more novel ways to sell debt to fund our government's budget deficit. From this report to the Secretary of the Treasury, from the Treasury Borrowing Advisory Committee, TBAC, if we scroll down, we can see that one of these possible new products is callable bonds, because the product has a large existing buyer base. And if we scroll down further, we can see that TBAC also discussed the green bond market, as well as 3-year tips and floating rate notes with different maturities. Now, keep in mind, TBAC is just looking at possible new products at this point in time. So everything we just shared with you is essentially in the exploratory phase. But what's clear is that the Treasury is searching for ways to attract more investors to the growing amount of debt that our country is issuing. I'm curious, though, which would interest you most? Callable treasuries, green bonds, 3-year tips, or floating rate notes with different maturities? Drop a comment below and let everyone know. And in case you're curious, here's what our latest poll results show at the time of this taping. My vote was for the 3-year tips as well, and I might actually buy them if they're ever introduced. Let's see if any of these make it past the Treasury's exploratory phase. Moving on now to takeaway 3. The Treasury announced the launch of a bond buyback program. The first buyback is planned relatively soon for Wednesday, May 29th. So, a buyback program is when the Treasury spends cash to buy back and retire some older bonds. And there can be 2 main reasons, in principle, why an issuer would launch a buyback program. Either because they're flush with cash and want to pay down some old debt, or because there's so much debt outstanding that they're afraid liquidity in the secondary market might begin to suffer. So the last Treasury buyback program was in the year 2000, when we had a budget surplus. And there was some extra cash around to retire some old bonds. But this time around, the Treasury says it simply intends to support the liquidity of the outstanding debt. The announced volume of the buybacks will be up to $30 billion per quarter, or 0.1% of all outstanding treasuries. Not really an overwhelming relative size, and it remains to be seen how successful the program will be. And yes, we will be doing a separate video on the Treasury's latest buyback plans, and keep following how the market reacts, because it really does deserve its own video, as some of you have already reminded us. So stay tuned for more insights on the Treasury buyback program on Diamond NestEgg. So these 3 key takeaways from the Treasury refunding statement put the spotlight once more on our country's growing dependency on debt, and how some bright minds in the Treasury are clearly giving it a lot of thought on how to keep financing and refinancing the outstanding amounts as smoothly as possible. That said, despite the long-term clouds on the horizon, the Treasury auction refunding announcement last week was more or less in line with expectations, which brings us neatly to the next section of our video. So let's compare Treasury yields from this past Friday versus the previous week. Here we have all the maturities of the Treasury issues at auction. Here's where yields stood this past Friday, and here's where yields stood at the end of the previous week. With the exception of the 1-month, 4-month, and 6-month maturities, which went up slightly, bond yields were pretty much down across the board, especially on the medium and long end, as you can see here. There were 2 primary reasons for this. First, while the Fed kept rates unchanged in last week's meeting, Fed Governor Powell made clear that he had no plans for a rate hike. Second, Friday's jobs report showed a weakening labor market, with unemployment ticking up slightly. A weakening labor market could indicate a slowing economy, which in turn could possibly bring the Fed to not just keep rates stable, but to actually start lowering them. Having said all this, in the grand scheme of things, bond yields are still mostly up since we kicked off 2024, as you can see from this table comparing Treasury yields from this past Friday versus on January 2nd. This row shows the increase or decrease in rates since the beginning of this year to the time of this taping. Increases in rates are shown in black and decreases in rates are shown in red. On the very short end, yields are a bit down, but the changes are a few basis points only. Otherwise, rates are still noticeably higher overall than at the beginning of the year, especially for the medium and longer maturities, as you can see here. So that was a recap of bond yields from last week. Now let's take a look at the upcoming week's auctions and yield expectations for some of those auctions. So here we are at Treasury Direct's upcoming auctions page. If we scroll down, we can see that all the weekly T-bill and CMB auctions are happening as usual. Here is the 42-day CMB that will eventually become the 6-week T-bill per the latest Treasury auction refunding statement. And if we scroll down further, we can see that this upcoming week's auctions include the 3-year T-note, the 10-year T-note, and the 30-year T-bond, none of which are reopening auctions, meaning that the coupon is still to be determined. Let's go now to Fidelity to see what their estimates are for the upcoming auctions. Here we see the expected coupon and the expected yield for the 3-year T-note. Here is the expected coupon and the expected yield for the 10-year T-note. And here is the expected coupon and the expected yield for the 30-year T-bond. If we were to summarize, Fidelity shows us market expectations that are slightly lower than current prices on the short end, up to 6 months, but roughly in line with the latest actual numbers that we've been discussing before. So the market seems to expect a more or less stable week for Treasuries, but you never know. Do keep in mind that these numbers can and generally do change all the way up to the date and time of the auction, and a lot can happen in a few days' time. And remember, when you buy at auction, you don't know the exact price you'll be paying or the exact rate that you'll be getting until after the auction takes place. The only thing you do know is that you're generally getting the best price at that moment in time based on the then prevailing market conditions and sentiment, and that you're getting exactly the same price and conditions as the largest bidders, regardless of the size of your personal order. Now, Who's planning on picking up some Treasury notes and bonds in the upcoming week? And if you are, which maturities do you have your eye on? Or are you sticking with T-bills for now? Drop a comment below and let everyone know. So I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. And if you did, I'd love to invite you to take a look at this video here on one of our 2 brand new bond courses so that you can take advantage of some of these anticipated higher for longer rates. Or come join our Super Saver Live member Q&A session on Monday, May 20th at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. One of the highlights will be the upcoming 10-year TIPS auction. Check out the links below this video for more details on our bond courses and YouTube Super Saver membership. All right, members, Super Savers, and bond course fans, good luck to everyone who's planning on buying at the upcoming week's auctions. And see you again very soon with more brand new wealth building content for your financial journey.